co-ops, community-supported agriculture, farmers markets. So that's one kind of participatory economics. And it's important. I'm in favor of it. I think it's very important because it demonstrates that, something along the lines of equitable cooperation, it works and it doesn't break down and it's good and we like it. But that's sort of a local kind of participatory economics. This particular model was designed originally as a theoretical answer to a claim that you can't run a national economy this way. So it is quite explicitly a proposal about this is how you could actually run an entire national economy in a way that's not central planning and it's not a market system. Now, that's different from asking, well, what if some country ever implemented this model? How would they engage in international trade? Well, there's two possibilities, and one is obviously much more likely than another. One is all the economies in all the countries of the world are operating on this basis in some manner or form. Lovely, not likely to happen that way. The other possibility is that some particular country decides something along these lines, and most other countries are still operating in a different kind of economic system. Well, I think what you want to know is, would it be impossible for an economy that was organized this way to participate in any part of the international division of labor? And the answer to that is no. There's no reason this economy couldn't engage in foreign trade. There is one sort of interesting question that arises. What if it was a really poor country that adopted this system? And by the way, I'd like to point out that you do not need, if you think through what I explained, is there any giant computer in this system? No. All you need is an abacus. The only calculations anybody ever has to do is the iteration facilitation board has to add up all the amounts that anybody is offered to produce of something and add up all the amounts that anybody is asked to use something and see what the difference is. This is not solving some big mathematical programming planning problem that you need a huge computer for. So it's not that you have to be some sort of an advanced economy to sort of do things this way. So this model is, at least on the surface, equally as possible for another question to ask is this proposal something that would require tremendously high levels of technical education in terms of how to use fancy equipment? No, it doesn't require that either. So anyway, it's perfectly possible that the first country that tried something like this would be a relatively poor country. Now, how could they engage in international trade? Basically the same way countries do now. You look and see, we can't make this, we can make this. So we're going to have to trade for it. Or we have a very large comparative advantage in this compared to that country. So we're going to make it here, we're going to trade for that. It's to our advantage, we're going to do it. The only other thing you have to decide is, well, what are the terms of trade going to be with a trading partner? And if you're a poor country, the principles of justice that basically sort of are part of the glue that holds together this sort of whole system say, if you're the poorer country, no holds barred. Go for the best terms of trade you can. If you can get 80% of the efficiency gain from the specialization in trade, you have every right to do it because you're the poorer country. What if some country that's a wealthy country? This is a good question for Sweden. So what if Sweden adopts this? And you want to trade with Ghana? There's still stuff, there's some very sensible trade that go on between Ghana and Sweden. I assume you don't grow any coffee, and I know they do, and you should be drinking coffee. So there you're going to need to trade with Ghana. Is it a good idea? Yes, it is. Is there an efficiency gain from trade in which you're getting coffee from Ghana? Yes, there is. The terms of trade that whatever you're selling them, the terms of trade are basically going to divide that efficiency gain between you and Ghana. if you were in a position, if you were sufficiently powerful, if Sweden was sufficiently powerful to drive the terms of trade very much in your favor, so that Sweden got 90% of the efficiency gain and Ghana got only 10%, you'd have basically violated your own principles of what it is that's fair when we engage in economic cooperation. So I call it the 50% principle. In a very practical sense, if you're the poorer country, you don't have to do anything different than countries do now. They try and get the best terms of trade they can, and they try and trade when it's to their advantage. If you were a wealthier country, you would have to actually remember, it really violates our principles to get more than 50% of the efficiency gain, because we're already better off than them. We are already somehow getting rewards for our efforts that are greater than theirs. But other than that, there's no technical problem with engaging in trade or not engaging in trade if you're an economy like this, even if the rest of the world are very different kinds of economies. But it is something that people have asked a lot about, and it's sort of a concern. It is a legitimate concern. You want to be sure that, well, if we did this, that's all fine, except in a global economy, somehow we couldn't function, or we couldn't do things that would be a desirable thing to do. But I think that turns out not to be the case.
I haven't read your book, but I will. I wonder about this difference between labor-managed firms and what you describe as workers' councils. And the second is, in the discussion about economic democracy and labor-managed firms, you make a distinction between public jobs and the private sector. And when you discuss about producing, a lot of things are produced, now the state and the people decide when it comes to education, hospitals, social service. So how does your model work?
Okay.
If it's just consumer and producers, and what about the what do you call? There's different positions to take.
You've already raised two things that I neglected to even cover in the presentation, and you noticed it, and you're absolutely right. One is, I was talking about neighborhood consumption councils and how they work. I was talking about a workers' council and how they work. What I've neglected to mention is that you have to have federations of consumer councils. You're going to have, so I don't know what your political divisions are here, but suppose you have neighborhoods, boroughs, cities, counties. You're going to have not just neighborhood consumption councils, you're going to have a federation of all the neighborhoods in a borough. And you're going to have a federation of all the boroughs in the city. And why is that? Well, a big hospital, sort of a teaching hospital with surgery, that's something that's probably a city. You want the city federation to be requesting that during the planning process, because that's a public good that basically serves the whole city. Now, what about a clinic that's just sort of a clinic that might be in a borough, in a part of the city? Well, that should be something that the borough federation of all the neighborhoods decides, are we going to ask for a new clinic that's in this part of the city? The city federation has to decide, are we going to ask as a consumption request for, we want a new 300-bed hospital. That's what we're asking for. Those are all sort of public goods. And you want to proceed, and one of the real advantages of this procedure over a market economy is, notice that if the federations are making proposals and revising proposals in every iteration, just like the individual neighborhoods and the individual producer councils are, then basically you've made it just as easy for people to express desires for collective consumption as individual consumption. And one of the huge pieces of inefficiency, one of the huge biases in market economies is, what a market system does is it minimizes the transactions costs of engaging in individual consumption. And it in no way reduces the transactions costs people have to engage in collective consumption. So you want these consumer federations to participate on an equal footing with neighborhood consumption councils in the planning process